Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us and logging in today. And I want to introduce our panel in a second here. My name's Jason. I work here at 360 in the marketing department, and maybe some of you would have received an email from me inviting you to this webinar. So thank you for accepting the invitation. We really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you also to Michael Glenn and Mary Weston from Bosch, who are joining us as our expert panelists this afternoon. Bosch has been a client of ours since way back in 2011, and I think we've learned a lot together over the years. We'll get into some of that today, and I want to thank you two personally, Michael and Mary. Thank you for your time today. Also on the call, we have Kristen Connor. She's our Director of Risk and Compliance here at 360, and she's got some interesting data to share with you around not only how we solved Bosch's original business problem that they came to us with back in 2011, but also some really important and kind of surprising information around optimizing your incentive programs so you're only paying out on the most qualified claims. And in a second here, I'm going to throw to your host with the most, that's Manny Elawar, who is Bosch's Client Success Executive at 360. And we're going to pass the presentation to Manny in a second. I'll be compiling your questions during the webinar in the background, so feel free to drop them into the chat box, and I will pass them over to Manny toward the end when we get into some Q&A. So, Manny, take it away, please.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jason. And many thanks again to Michael and Mary for joining us today and participating in really telling the story of how BSH and 360 became partners. So that's great. We appreciate it. We have a packed agenda today, so I'll quickly walk through it. We'll start by giving a little background about, really the start of our relationship together and the use case that facilitated our introduction. And then we'll spend a little bit of time discussing the problems that we were solving for BSH in the beginning and a little bit about the work that we do together today. Then I'll throw it over to Kristen Connor, who Jason mentioned, our Director of Risk and Compliance, and she's going to walk us through the importance of compliance in the incentive space, and more specifically, the importance of digitization to facilitate effective compliance processes. Afterwards, we'll discuss how the digitization of incentives really allows us to utilize data and gain insight and allow that insight to influence our future decision making. Then we'll talk briefly about how the digital medium improves the customer experience as a whole in the incentive space. And lastly, we'll touch a little bit on the benefits of compliance from an ROI perspective. And then we'll, as Jason mentioned, spend some time on Q&A. So really the three areas of impact we're going to be focusing on today are incentive compliance, data insights, and consumer user experience. And when it comes to BSH, and quite a lot of the inception of the relationship happened before my time with 360, but I think it's well worth sharing because while many of our clients come to 360 with a marketing problem that they want to solve, i.e. wanting to obtain better data insights or improving the user experience, Bosch was first looking to solve an incentive fraud problem in both their SPIF and consumer rebate programs. So that was the priority for them back in 2011 when we were first introduced. And BSH was introduced to us through mutual connections, and they had told us really that they identified they had a risk of financial exposure through non-compliant claims. And they recognized that they didn't have the expertise in-house to audit incentives effectively. And so our solution solved the problem, and really it solved it in a way that excited them because we were leveraging the power of digitization in combination with advanced algorithms that really allow us to significantly increase the efficacy of enforcing compliance. And so they came on and partnered with us from a SPIFs perspective, and all the way through to today, we're now running SPIFs, consumer rebates, instant rebates, and doing a few other things together, and really enjoying that partnership together. So that's a brief background. And Mary and Michael, I think I'll throw it over to you quickly just to jump in and give us a little bit of a sense of, in the very beginning, I know you guys weren't involved, but bring us to today and tell us, give us a sense of what the importance of compliance is to BSH, and does that focus still exist today like it did back in 2011?
I mean, I think one of the things, the key word in our organization now is compliance. Like I said, we have mandatory compliance training at least 3 times a year. We just came out of a session last year. So one of the things with the digitized world that we've had to deal with, one of the executive from a global standpoint is compliance. I mean, that's one of the key words that we are reminded of on a weekly basis from executive management. Also, so like I said, the advantage of working with 360, they have solved a lot of our problems from processing, from administrative time to cut it down because of their, their OCR recognition software, along with, having familiarity with our dealer base, with our sales associates, and with the industry in general. Like I said, we have almost nil when it comes to fraud at this point.
That's great. That's great insight, Michael. Thank you. Appreciate it. And that really is a great segue into how we're going to discuss the compliance process as a whole, because really when you were originally doing business with us, before we got started, it was very much a manual compliance process. And so when you look at what a manual process looks like, you have claims that are predominantly paper-based. And as such, they're manually adjudicated. And as you ramp up and start to realize you have really too many claims to scale the manual adjudication process and auditing process, we turn towards a random audit approach. And when you implement a random audit approach, you start to identify non-compliance or identify fraud taking place, and that leads to having to open up an investigation to dig deeper into where that fraud is occurring, really in a reactive manner as opposed to a proactive approach. And so the entire process ends up taking a much longer period of time, and in the end, it's not really friendly to the consumer. And so when we first started doing business together, Bosch had a really no-nonsense auditor based out of Germany that would stay up late checking our audit work, and 360 offers 100% auditing of every incentive claim entered into our system. And the auditor had trouble really imagining that was even possible, and rightfully so, because in the previous world, it would have never been possible. But this is one of the important points of why it makes sense to go 100% digital for these programs. And so this auditor was, up burning the midnight oil, looking up rebate addresses and Google Maps and other means, emailing excitedly with Jason Atkins, our CEO, in the middle of the night, impressed with how comprehensive our techniques were in addressing compliance with their claims. And so the more that these claims have moved to pure digital, the higher quality work we've been able to deliver in this domain. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kristen Connor, and Kristen's going to walk us through the compliance process and the importance of digitization in this space.
Great, thanks, Manny. My name is Kristen Connor. I'm the Director of Risk and Compliance here at 360, and my world is living, breathing fraud and identifying fraud and everything that goes with the data surrounding how we identify fraud. So I'm going to start off just by touching on, there's an ongoing debate on the difference between non-compliance and fraud between myself and our CEO, which tends to be a funny conversation between the two of us regularly. In essence, it comes down to intent. Non-compliance is generally completed without intent, where fraud is intent and in most cases is always present. Due to the nature of our business, we generally do not imply the label of fraud until it's confessed or we have substantiating evidence or it's proven in court. However, in order for 360 to have the right controls, we have to understand fraud and the reason why people commit fraud so we can prevent against it. There are a number of different factors that go into creating a reason to commit fraud. According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, people commit fraud when there is the adequate pressure, opportunity, and rationalization present themselves to the individual. And pressure could come from anything such as monetary problems or greed. Incentives and consumer rebates present individuals with the adequate opportunity. And then rationalization can come from one justifying an unethical action. So one of those things in a common phrase that I hear in the industry is those big manufacturers are probably already making a large profit on the product anyways. They probably don't care about the $100, $200 fraudulent rebate that they're going to submit. So when all of those factors are present, that's what they call the fraud triangle, and that's what tends to lead someone down the path of committing fraud. Okay, so based on what the the CFEs. So CFEs are certified fraud examiners. That's what I am. We're seeing from their organization, the median response provided by these CFEs is that organizations lose about 5% of their annual revenues due to fraud. This was right from the 2018 report of the nations produced by the Association of Fraud Examiners. And based on those CFEs surveyed, as a baseline, if you look at the amount of spend in your programs and equated that to the 5% that you would potentially expect to see in relation to fraudulent or non-compliant activity, you could get a baseline for what the amount of fraud would be present within your rebate and or incentive programs. And so we aim to prevent as much of that non-compliant activity as possible. Before we can action, we need to identify what types of claims are being submitted. Well, we know that there's going to be fraud and we know there's going to be non-compliant activity. We still need to be able to weed those out from the legitimate claims. So first we need to identify legitimate claims. With legitimate claims, you normally see declined or on hold claimant get back to us with the missing or required or otherwise previously in question claim information. Where non-compliant claimants tend to generally drop out of the program after being declined or put on hold by our RAC processes. This is usually a result of fraudsters trying out the program and trying to look for system loopholes. So when they get to the point of being caught, they tend to drop out and fall away. So when we first initiate new programs for manufacturers, we see the decline reason or the decline rates as high as 14%. And then after the first few months, we usually start to see it dip down to around that 4 or 5% level, which is more in line to what the CFEs were seeing when they were doing their surveys. So that was nice to see that we're aligning with the industry. So I'm going to go over the old audit process and the way it used to look before digitization. When the process of setting up a program and submitting a claim via mail-in rebate with the absence of digitization of the data, it created a circle or web, if you will, that was hard to follow and easy to exploit with non-compliant activity. If you're not able to connect the dots, you won't be able to quantify the program or identify areas for concern. The process of manually reviewing claims one by one without capturing the data does not allow you to identify trends and patterns while highlighting similarities. So if we move to what we're doing today, 360 takes a very systematic approach to the claim process, from program generation to claim payout. This 360 risk and compliance process, along with the adjudication team, work together to prevent and identify non-compliant activity through the assessing of the program setups, terms and conditions, and looking for fraud indicators in the data. Now, our adjudication team looks at every single claim with regards to auditing the program or the documentation that supports the data in the system. And after, they're really our first line of defense. And then the risk and compliance team steps in and looks at the data that has been entered and runs it through known control mechanisms. So we're able to use a number of different control mechanisms before we have the data, allowing us to do some controls and implementing different controls on a mass scale. It is one of the areas of our business that allows us to assess all claims from all manufacturers against the same controls and use data to highlight the trends and patterns that would indicate fraud. Think about if all the data lived in boxes stored in a room that requires someone to manually put together cases. The rebate process would not be as fast as it is today, and we would not be able to catch non-compliant activity to the scale we do today. We're able to run all of our claim data through our controls, no matter the time of day, and assess all those claims kicked out on a daily basis. So I'm going to talk about this. So in 2017, we actually stopped $90 million and provided those savings to our 360 clients across the board just through the controls we have with our adjudication and risk and compliance team. And at 360, we focus on 3 pillars of identifying non-compliant activity. We focus on prevention and detection, 100% digital audit for claim compliance to identify and reduce errors or non-compliant activity. We consider this the first line of defense in our standard controls. The second thing that we do is we identify and examine the data. So reporting design to identify, analyze transactions, and enable trend identification and examination. We look at this to see what else is occurring. Is something else going on that we need to be looking at, or is there something going on that is circumventing the controls outside of the norm? We use this to build new controls. And the last pillar is investigation. So this is more the reactive side as opposed to the proactive side. And that was what Manny was discussing earlier in this webinar. We do formal audit reviews of consumer and channel incentives and resellers to identify unsubstantiated claims. Sometimes fraud cannot be identified through all the control mechanisms and are generally caused by involvement at a higher level where there is enough knowledge of the process to circumvent the system. We use tips and sales data to help us weed out those more sophisticated, organized activities. So I want to switch more towards the type of approach we take. So the best way to combat fraud is to prevent it. It's much harder to detect it. This is another topic that's deeply discussed within the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. The perception of detection is one of the most effective ways to prevent fraud. The fear of being detected or the fear of being caught, it acts as a control mechanism. Some of those areas can include strong terms and conditions, upfront validation of data with error messages, and flagging and preventing claims from being paid out due to known non-compliant activity. A great example I always use is recycled sales. Some have thought that we will forget, we being 360, will forget about a sale that occurred in 2015, for example, and attempt to submit the same claim in 2018. Our control mechanisms allow us the opportunity to use historical claim data against a current submission to identify an irregularity in the claim submission. Now, following these patterns and trends in the data is the most important practice to uncover fraudulent activity and is the key ingredient to building preventative practices in the system. People who attempt to submit non-compliant claims will always try to circumvent the system. It is up to us to find the activity and create the controls to prevent that activity moving forward. So I want to talk about digitization, and I know that this will continuously be reiterated, but fraudsters will always try different ways to test the system. I always say when one door closes, another door opens, and we're always trying to find where the loopholes or the gaps or the opportunity, if you will, is presenting itself so we can close that area down. But going digital allows for us to review mass amounts of data against known fraud patterns and trends in order to identify fraudulent activity. Digitization allows us the opportunity to change with the fraud and identify in the data. This does not exist if data lives tucked away in boxes or stored in an area where it's not easily accessible. So the next slide that you're seeing here is a slide that is generally shown to our clients who run this, but essentially with the data, we're actually able to flag different things to our clients. So here is an example of one where we're reporting we can pull back a result of our risk and compliance processing. Sadly, whenever you're offering a financial incentive, there's always going to be dubious operators who are always looking to game the system. And some of those things we do is to call out the top violators and provide them to BSH, who can decide how they want to proceed in dealing with the partner from there. Michael and Mary, I'm going to allow you an opportunity if you wanted to touch on the information on this slide.
Yeah, and before you do that, Michael and Mary, just to give a little bit of context, because this is something that you and I worked on together. This is what we're doing here is a very specific use case that BSH has, where they don't want their dealer channel selling product outside of their territory in specific cases. So this is a prime example of data that we're able to leverage, and what we're doing is detecting individuals at the dealer level that are making sales to consumers that live outside of 150-mile radius away from the dealership, and that's something that is a violation of the compliance rules that BSH has in place. So maybe Mike and Mary, you can talk more about what you do with this data and how beneficial it is to you.
Thanks, Manny. I think with the data, I said this is what we this is kind of our police action with some of our top violators, because we do have certain product that's that's DMRP protected and MAP protected, that we have restrictions on how far they can go outside of a 150-mile zone without prior approval from executive management. So, like I said, once we receive this report, we reach out to the sales associates and, if need be, the principals of these companies. And the fact that they know that we're looking at things has reduced the violations tremendously. I think more than anything, the fact is that they know that we are looking at the data every month is the biggest preventer for these dealers from trying to do this.
Okay, great. That's great insight. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Kristen, for walking us through all that detail throughout the compliance process. And really this use case that we're looking at is a great segue into looking at how digitization, it has a significant impact in compliance aspect of incentives, as you just outlined, Kristen, but there are a ton of other benefits as well. And over the last 10 years, 360 has been in this unique position of being able to take an industry that was predominantly paper-based for an extremely long period of time and really bring data and analytics to the table. And so today we're going to run through one example of that we work with Bosch together on, but the possibilities really are abundant with the types of insights you can glean from the data. And we can leverage analytics that showcase the performance of a specific program all the way to deriving insights on the entire channel spend as a whole. So, in today's environment, really what we're seeing in the market and how consumer rebates are being traded is in one of the following three ways. Either they're a necessary evil or a pull tactic or a final interaction, or at least that's the perception. But in many cases, rebates aren't even considered a channel incentive, and the budgets are sitting outside of the channel spend itself. So this leads to different incentive types within an organization being looked at separately. And really they should be looked at and viewed holistically. And what 360 is trying to do is convert what we call the blind spend into a clarity of spend. We consider it much more valuable to ask the question, what was my total spend on a particular SKU or product category in the channel, as opposed to the narrower question of, what was the rebate I paid on that SKU? And so by viewing the spend in its totality, we gain better insight into its effectiveness. And so today we're going to walk through an example of a particular case of analytics that we have been working on with Bosch, but I wanted to point to the bigger picture for you of where we're at with insights and analytics as a whole. And so, Michael and Mary, I'll get you guys to comment in a second, but just briefly, what I'll say about what's on the screen here is I think this has become a really important piece of what we're able to offer. And what I personally observed in working with many of our clients is that one of their top concerns is often simply whether or not their incentives are even competitive against what's being offered by the rest of the marketplace. So because 360 is running incentive programs for so many of the world's top brands, we're able to offer benchmarking data like what we're displaying here against a host of different variables. In this case, it's price segmentation. We'll view it in product category in a minute. But what makes this possible is the fact that Bosch and some of the other large brands have moved to 100% digitization of these programs. And that's really key because that's what enables the risk and compliance measure Kristen just told you about, but it's also what gives us the power to help inform our client's strategy through data-driven decisions. So, what you're looking at on the screen here is, and we've blurred out the data for privacy, obviously, but this is something that we bring to Bosch and we say, in rebates specifically, in each of these different price segmentations, here's the average spend that you're paying out per claim in your various brands against other brands in the marketplace, to give you a sense of whether you're over-indexing or under-indexing. And what's really great is that we can even take it one step further and say, within a specific price segment, here are the different payouts at a product category level. And you get really granular insight into where you can potentially find savings and redistribute funds to be more effective with the dollars spent based on what the market is doing. And so, that's really exciting, and that's really the promise of big data for our line of work. And I'll turn it over to Michael and Mary just quickly. When you get this type of reporting and you have this level of insight, what does that kind of stuff mean to you at Bosch, and how do you expect it to really change the way that you work? What value are you getting out of this?
Well, man, when we look at this, we're comparing it to what's out in the field, obviously. And, this is coming from the sales associate at this level and then what they're selling. And then we can go to the principals and say, with our brands compared to the other brands, and if we are being competitive.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so we're going to quickly pivot into brand sentiment and customer experience. Before we get into this section, I thought it'd be useful to state a working definition of customer or consumer experience. And so customer experience, we're defining it as your customer's perception of how the company treats them. And these perceptions affect their behaviors and build memories and feelings and may drive their loyalty. So in other words, if they like you and continue to like you, they're going to do business with you and recommend you to others. And for your customers to like you, you need to know them well. And that allows you to create and deliver personalized experiences that will entice their loyalty. But you're not going to collect this information overnight. You need to gain in-depth knowledge about customers by collecting a lot of customer data and bring out valuable insights from that data with speed and precision. And so in this first slide, what you're looking at here is the results of a very recent survey that asked marketers specifically what they see as being the most exciting business opportunity for them in 2019. And you can see that there's a lot of focus amongst the group falling onto customer experience for next year. And that falls in line with a Walker study we recently reviewed that says by the year 2020, customer experience will overtake price and product as the key brand differentiator. So that's really exciting, because one of the opportunities that digitization has brought for marketers is the chance to deliver brand experiences with far greater continuity than ever before. And kind of a weird side effect of that is that we're now more likely to see things like social media reviews of a consumer's experience with the brand rather than the experience with the product. And, I've heard this referred to as the Uberization of everything. But really the net effect is that the bar of consumer expectations really is set to wherever their last brand interaction was. And so as brands, it falls on us to ensure that we are setting the bar as high as possible. And so the focus from the previous slide that you saw makes good sense, because when you look at this slide and in this chart specifically, there's three key reasons there for why you'd want to look at this as an area of focus, and it all ties to retention and growth. And so, Michael, Mary, I'll turn it over to you. Just briefly give us a sense of, we originally started out our relationship with a compliance focus and a fraud focus, but over the years and into today, how important is the customer experience to the BSH brand and in the work that you do?
I think, Manny, it is all about the customer experience with the BSH brands. Due to the fact is, like I said, we're not the lowest price point. We're in the luxury market. I mean, we don't have large advertising spends with our competitors. I said all of our marketing is about the experience, the culinary experience with our brands. I think what we do is just out in the field with our own sales associates and working with our salespeople is we try to get our sales associates to upsell to Bosch, because it is an upsell within our categories between Bosch, Thermador, and Gaggenau. I mean, we are not like I said, we are not the cheap commodity brand. We don't fight in the commodity brand. We don't participate in Black Friday. We don't participate in any type of sales, which has helped our brand, because the thing is that the sales associates know they have confidence in the brand, but also they know they're going to make margin on the brand during those periods. So what it does to offset that, trying to sell something at $3.99 instead of $8.99, that customer experience, not only from on the sales floor all the way through the experience of working with the rebate, working with 360, to making sure that is a smooth transition. That is top priority for us at BSH.
Great, thank you for that information, and that actually flows nicely into where we want to take the conversation, because really the claim experience at the end of the day, it's really an extension of that interaction that they had with purchasing the product. And so with your permission, Michael and Mary, that I got a chance, obviously, I'm going to share a couple of pages from the actual live consumer rebate program site that Bosch uses. And the reason I'm sharing this is because, again, part of the power of digitizing these programs comes from the ability to have your claim entry, your terms and conditions, and all other relevant information living all in a single area. And so what we have here is a responsive website that the consumer lands on. It's very simple in its design. It works seamlessly across various device types. And you can see that when the consumer lands on the page, we already know what they're there to do. And they're there to either start a new rebate or check on an existing claim. And so the page isn't cluttered with a ton of other extraneous stuff. It's just those two things, and it's really clear how they can start to achieve their goal in visiting the site. And another key way that going digital has helped BSH to deliver a great consumer experience is between the last screen I just showed you and this one, the consumer is prompted with a short list, sort of like a checklist of all the things that they'll need in order to successfully enter the rebate claim. So for example, we require that they upload a copy of their store invoice, and we don't want them to send them looking for that invoice halfway through the claim redemption process. So simple things like this, helping them prepare properly and make the process easier and more enjoyable, is where we see those added touches in the consumer experience. And we've been through these pages, Michael and Mary. I don't know how many times we've gone through revisions of these pages together, but through processing millions of these claims, another value point of going digital is that we're able to test and reconfigure and review analytics on which data entry fields and buttons, et cetera, should be placed where, and what order the process should operate in to make it as optimal of an experience as possible for the consumer. And so, BSH sells some really great products, and the last thing we want to do is deliver a rebate experience that is not on par with the experience consumers are receiving from purchasing their product. And the rebate process really is the last 3 feet of delivering a great consumer experience for people that have chosen BSH. And so, Michael, Mary, I don't know if you have anything to add really on that aspect of it, on the importance of the claim redemption process as an extension of the product life cycle.
Yeah. Just to echo you on a couple of things, Manny, you're correct. I mean, just going through this process and getting feedback from our consumers, we are able to, like we added to the serial numbers. Consumers sometimes don't know where the serial numbers are on their product. So they can go in here and they can click on it and they can go right to, the page where it's going to say where your refrigerator serial number is, because that is, required when they go to submit this. So, and another thing, like you said, they can take a picture of their invoice right there at the store level and send it in and start the process, and they can get help with their, with the associates right there. So. Right.
No, that's great. And actually, Mary, feedback is an important piece, right? And so one of the things that we started doing many years ago was we would measure customer experience by way of feedback. And that can be measured through the product, through support experience. But the way that we do that at 360 is by using something called the Net Promoter Score system. So if you look at the image on the screen here, you can see how it works. We ask a single question, something along the lines of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend BSH products to a friend or family member? And then we tabulate those scores across thousands or tens of thousands of rebate claims, and you end up with a meaningful result. And if there's a score of 6 or lower, as you can see on the scale, that's classified as a detractor. If it's a 7 or an 8, it's classified as neutral, and a promoter is designated if they give a 9 or a 10. And so really how you calculate the overall aggregate score is your percentage of your promoters minus your percentage of your detractors gives you an output on a scale of -100 to +100. So you can see here that, what's considered great in the NPS system is a score above 30, and excellent, a score above 70. So you really you have to work hard at performing to get a great NPS score. And you know, Bosch has always done a commendable job of delivering great products and services. And so, you know, we're going to see the extension of that in the next slide, but we're going to show you really the types of data we're able to collect that reinforce that experience. So this first slide that you're looking at is product NPS. And we ask this question at the end of the claim redemption experience. So once the consumer has completed their claim, they're asked a question on a scale of 1 to 10 to rate the experience of the claim redemption process itself. Nothing to do with the purchase or their experience as a whole, more specifically claim redemption. And you can see here that we're able to deliver these types of reporting to Bosch to show how they stack up in the marketplace, but also the results is that they're exceeding over 40 and 50, which is a great score on a regular basis. And that's assessing the product specifically. One of the things we also do is we ask questions to those that reach out to our contact center. So a consumer, if they have any issue with their claim and they require support, they can contact one of our contact center representatives to receive assistance. And at the end of that interaction, we ask them 2 questions. The first is centered around the brand. So we do the same thing via NPS. How likely are you to recommend the brand on a scale of 1 to 10? And you know, we have a target of being in that great and excellent category. And you can see here over the last year that BSH has continuously been exceeding you know, our baseline target of roughly 60% and really in that excellent category. One of the other data points we collect is the second question is the experience of support. So it's not one thing to just allow the great experience to end at claim submission, but we have to ensure that the consumer has a great experience and that same standard of high level quality of experience throughout the entire process until payment. And so one of the other things we ask is when they are receiving support from 360 on behalf as an extension of BSH, can they rate that experience? And so, Michael, I think you actually had an anecdote that you had shared with me when recently reviewing this data in comparison to some other NPS data that you had been reviewing. But how do these results kind of stack up, and what do you gain from these results?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that, you know, from a brand standpoint and from the contact center, you know, with talking with consumers, the scores are excellent. I said we were in some meetings last week, and people were sharing they had 35% NPS scores, and I kind of chuckled at that, saying it's still a good score. But when we reflect on what, you know, our data, you know, we get back from, you know, 360, make sure that we're more than doubling that score in a lot of the areas. So that's a good feeling that, you know, more importantly, the brand is doing well, but more importantly, we have confidence that 360 is doing their job and making it a pleasant experience for our consumer base.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that behind the scenes insight. So lastly, what we're going to briefly touch on before we turn over to Q&A is just talking about, you know, we had talked about compliance at the top of the call. And really one of the things that we do and one of the reports that we provide to BSH is a report like you see below. Again, the actual values grayed out or blurred out for privacy. But one of the great benefits we see from a comprehensive digital compliance process is that there are significant savings realized by not paying out non-compliant claims. That's something that Kristen had touched on during her section. And these savings can be reinvested in additional programs that create further value. And in many cases, what we see is that the savings in compliance, or rather not paying out compliance claims, actually ends up exceeding the cost of administering these and executing these programs to begin with, which is really great to see. And, you know, really we're only talking about one type of ROI here. We're talking about administrative ROI. And one of the things that our business intelligence team is working on is fine-tuning analysis and calculations on determining spend ROI and really focusing on how do we solve for increasing lift in sales as a function of the direct channel incentive spend. So there's 2 different types of ROI there, and 360 is really focused on optimizing both for our clients. And so Michael and Mary, I'll just quickly get your opinion on when you see reporting like this. This is something we walk through all the time. You know, we give you this high-level summary, but we also provide it to you in a more detailed manner at the dealer level. Tell us how this is helpful to you with regards to these compliance reports and really the savings that you get from it.
I mean, man, I think the key thing for us, we really use this as a training tool out in the field with our sales managers, with the sales associates, because like I said, what we try to do is provide, even though we work with the consumers, especially on the spiff side, we really use it as a training tool to have our sales managers out in the field to work with the sales associates, make them become more efficient and reduce not only their administrative time, but also 360 and also BSH's time. I think that's the key thing for on the spiff side. And like I said, on the rebate side, it just reduces the amount of administrative time, especially with the digitized functions that we're utilizing at 360. Is that it's in, it's out, and like I said, we can review any type of exceptions exceptions are turned around in less than a week on let's say an upset sales associate or a consumer that's not happy with the decision on their transaction, like if it's outside of a period that the promotion was going on. So from our standpoint, it keeps us track, and the thing is that more importantly, it keeps us efficient and timely with response time.
Okay, excellent. That's great. Thank you. All right, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time and make sure we leave some room for Q&A. So what I want to do is just leave you guys with a few takeaways, and three main takeaways from today. And really the first is data informs a winning strategy. And what we mean by that is by having access to real-time data from your channel incentives, you can gain much more granular insights into their performance. And then you're able to determine where your channel spend is best utilized. Second is the customer experience is a powerful opportunity, and it can be measured, which is, I think, the best takeaway there. And collecting data is not strictly tied to the necessary criteria for validating a claim, but we can also collect NPS data, survey questions, opt-in strategies, and build a more meaningful relationship with the consumer that extends beyond the claim redemption process and ensures that that isn't a final interaction. And lastly, going 100% digital allows audit to be a compelling upside. And what I mean by that is not only are you enforcing the rules and combating sophisticated attempts at subverting them, but you're also benefiting from access to funds that can be further utilized that would otherwise have been paid out to undeserving individuals. And so those are the three key takeaways I want to leave with today. And I think Jason will be ready to open up for Q&A.
Yeah, I've got a great one here already, Manny. Is there any linking of the rebate workflow with the registration workflow, or is the consumer expected to fill in the same information in multiple places?
So there's two parts to that. First is whenever an individual submits a rebate claim with us, they're given a claim reference number. And so that identifies their claim within the system, and they can use that if they call into our contact center to receive support. They can use that as an identifier. If they are more likely to self-serve and want to self-serve, they can leverage that reference number to gain updates on the status of their claim. But on top of that, this is one of the key features that our clients have been asking us for, is tracking the behavior of a consumer over time. So you're going to have repeat interactions with a consumer. How do we track that behavior through claim data? And one of the ways we can do that is by actually leveraging a feature that we introduced in the platform a few months ago called registrations. And so if you're inclined, you can have the consumer create a profile with 360 when they're first coming to visit us to submit their claim. And what that allows them to do is to actually have an account or a profile with 360 that all of their future claiming behavior is then logged against. And so you have this really tight coupling between the various interactions that the consumer has with your brand, and allows you the ability to then leverage that data for follow-up, targeted communications, updating the strategy of your programs, and et cetera.
Okay, thank you for that. So I've got a couple other good questions here. What if you don't have complete data? How then do you identify fraud patterns and trends?
I think I'll defer to our
I think that's a good
fraud expert on the line.
So it depends what we mean by incomplete data, because for the most part, when we're looking at sales or when we're looking at information that we're receiving for the purposes of the claim. We do have enough information to understand what's going on with the product purchase and the sale. Oftentimes claims aren't delivered if you're talking about new builds from a consumer rebates perspective. There's a lot of things that we can do with regards to the consumer as a whole. And we look at that consumer and who they are in the market. You know, how did their claim come into us? Where do they live? What is their email? Is there anyone else residing with them? There's a number of different things that we can do from a fraud perspective when looking at the type of data that it's entered, but maybe doesn't have a serial number. So those are some of the, without getting into too many details, those are some of the things that we can do with regards to identifying fraud for incomplete or non-existing data. So again, it goes back to who is the individual submitting the claim and what is the likelihood that that is a viable sale.
And I correct me if I'm wrong too, because obviously not my department, but I think there are a lot of programs too where you can't complete a claim submission if you have incomplete data. Is that correct as well? So
that's correct. So there's
the data
a number.
Entry compliance is kind of built right into the claim entry process. Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
So a lot of the claims that come through our system, if it doesn't have all the required information to follow through the process to get an approved claim, you know, those claims will get kicked out of the system or are placed into a hold pattern in which, you know, we're requesting or waiting for that data to come in from the consumer in order to make the payment. Once we receive those, that information, it actually goes through the same scrutiny and fraud control mechanisms that we run on every claim once we receive the new data.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Kristen. Question here for Michael and Mary, and I guess you can choose in what detail you want to answer this one. How does Bosch utilize the 360 reporting functionality and layer the SPIF submission data into regional sales reports to assist their sales team?
Well, the thing is that we've set up that each individual regional sales manager has a login, so they go in at any time and see any type of SPIF from any one of their sales associates within their region. So it's very hands-on for the individual sales manager. We have it from a corporate standpoint. We see access to everything, but any sales associates assigned to that individual district sales manager, regional sales manager, can look at any time that the SPIF activities for their employees.
Okay, thank you for that. This is another one that may be for Kristen. How do Bosch and 360 manage written claims by the customer from a fraud point of view? And then they put more like future dated deliveries. So Kristen, maybe you could tell us how we sort of organize auditing around that.
So I think it still goes back to the claim, like with regards to the program setup guidelines. You know, if it's a sale where you know, it's a program where it's based on sale date, and you know, they want to make sure that they're delivering product and going out the door. You know, we have different control mechanisms where we can actually obtain the data at claim entry upon the sale and actually not pay out the claim until it's delivered and we receive that serial number or some other type of delivery manifest that can prove that the delivery happened. Now, and again, when we talk about our fraud controls, we put those claims into a holding pattern so that we can, once we receive the required data before paying the claim out, we can actually run those algorithms on that claim as soon as it's updated and then have it assessed for all of our control, through all of our control mechanisms before we pay the claim out. And we're able to do that at any time during the day so that it goes through all of our algorithms and that our team is reviewing anything that flags as an irregular claim.
Thank you. Manny, perhaps you can help with this next one. We use a hybrid system for processing rebates, a bit of manual, a bit of automation. How does integration work with your platform?
So that's a great question. Really what we try to do and what we're trying to bring to rebates as a whole is best practices. What we've seen as you know, repeated observations of how best to implement a rebate program that allows for maximizing the consumer experience and optimizing that, as well as ensuring that it's in line with our clients' goals. So we typically don't integrate with other systems for rebates. What we can do is, and one of the things, I don't know if Kristen will be able to speak to it, it's kind of in parallel to the function that her team represents, but we have what's called we call it POS, but really it's bulk importing of claims. And so we do have standardized formats by which we can allow bulk submission of information, predominantly done on the spiff side. But really when it comes to rebates, more specifically, we really want that validation from the consumer. They're the one that's going to have the supporting documentation and the information. And we want to be able to have that touch point with them, collect the data from them, and continue the relationship with them. And so from a consumer rebates perspective, we don't see many requests for integration because it's very much a consumer driven initiation of the process. When we have something like instant rebates, which is slightly different, it's still a saving provided to the consumer, but it's provided at the point of sale as opposed to claim back. Then we can look at something like I just referenced, where we collect the data in bulk via standardized format or template and submit the submissions that way on behalf of the dealers that are claiming back as opposed to the consumer.
And I would also jump in there, Manny, and say, you know, a big control mechanism is understanding where the consumers are submitting from, you know, and we need a big piece of the puzzle is exposure to the terms and conditions. And when they're walking through the claim submission process, they're understanding the terms and conditions of the program. They're making sure that they're uploading all their documentation that's required. And then they're also entering their own information. Sometimes what will happen is dealers in the industry, you know, they want to help out, they want to help their consumers, they may want to try to integrate, but, you know, we really want that consumer to put in their own data so that we can communicate with them. And we also offer those opt-in questions so that we can do any marketing or email pushes out to them should we require it. So, you know, I would say that having them enter and that exposure to the terms and conditions and all the other pieces, data points that we can collect is also a way that we can help identify fraud as well.
That's very detailed. Thank you very much, you guys. Last question that I'm showing here, and then Manny, I mean, if you or Michael or Mary have anything to add, we can probably get everybody out of here by the appointed time. Last question is on the consumer rebate side, what is the assumption on breakage when running a program? Percentage of people assumed that will not submit a rebate. So those are kind of two different things, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And so one of the key pieces to that is, and where we've really started to investigate over the last, I'll say 12 to 18 months, is what you really need to truly identify that is access to sales data. And that's what 360 typically will request from a client who wants to answer that question. The actual answer really depends on the industry. It varies quite greatly. And it also depends on the approach you're taking to your promotion, whether it's a promotion that you're making extremely easy to submit into versus one that is one that is more paper-based, for example, right? If you're doing a mail-in component, then you're going to have less participation and less and then more breakage. So it really depends on, for us to be able to perform that analysis, we need to know what sales went into the channel in order to ensure that we have the complete picture of the market to compare against the submissions we see. But it's also the outcome of that analysis is very specific to specific criteria of the program and the approach.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Does anybody on the panel have anything to add? Or Manny, I mean, you're the master of ceremonies. Please. No,
I really just want to thank Michael and Mary again for their time and joining us on the call, and appreciate the great questions that were asked.
Thank you, everybody. And this recording will be available on our website in the next day or two. Depends how long it takes us to get it posted up, but you'll all receive an email that will link you to the deck, the presentation deck, of course, everybody wants that, and to the recording of the webinar if you want to share it with your teams. And any further questions you have from there, we'll make sure that there's a way to submit them from the web article that we'll be sharing to you. I guess that's about it. Manny?
That's great. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, everybody. And
Thank you.
good day. Thanks for coming.